Marilyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, it was a delight to meet you in person, flesh and bones, in Dubai, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's a real treat.
Yes, and I had to hold back and not to ask too many questions so that I can keep my curiosity for the recording to share it with the audience.
Yeah, and even with that, we managed to spend, I don't know, was it like 4 hours together?
Yes.
That was so brilliant. I hadn't had one of those conversations in years, I want to say.
Yeah, so many topics to explore.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yeah, I thought about this question. And it's really interesting because for the longest time, and still to this day, I have many moments where I'm guilty of being, well, not guilty, where my persona is more that of a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when you teach, you can't facilitate, because when you teach, you are telling people something, right? And I think both roles are very important. I don't think it's a bad thing to sometimes be in a position of dictating or telling or teaching. But I think I started calling myself a facilitator when I realized that some situations call on me to shut up.
Amen.
Yeah, and you know, to create a space for others to speak and make decisions. I think I play the role of a facilitator when I'm supporting usually executives or leadership teams in making a decision for their company. And there, I think it's not my place to teach. I can give them information and data to help improve their decision-making process. But in the end, nobody knows better than them what's right for their company. And that's when I started switching roles, like taking one hat off and putting the other on. I even think like everything in me changes, my body language, the way I'm speaking, the rhythm of my voice. Like I know when I'm switching to facilitator mode, and it's when I'm letting somebody else take the front stage, and my job is just to help them land where they need to go, as opposed to teach them something.
Love that. And I think it's also the moment where we calm down, we ask more questions, we literally hold the space for them to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I wonder, I think I get the difference or the difficulty or maybe the ease to switch from teaching to facilitating. And I know that you've been a manager before. So how is the switch from being a manager? Because there it's not teaching, it's telling. Very often. Well, it depends a little bit on your management style. But how is it to switch then from managing, being a manager, to being a facilitator? And when are you switching your hat? Because it can also be a benefit for your clients that you have the expertise.
Yeah, completely. Look, I still think that as far as being a facilitator, I'm also very hands-on in terms of the services that I offer to my clients on the execution side. Part of it is because I don't think that it's enough to help a company or a group of people reach a decision. Sometimes what they already knew what they wanted to do, but it's what they find hardest to make it happen. So I will still say that whether that's good or not, it depends on the client. I'm still very hands-on with helping them with the project management piece and the execution piece. I'm never satisfied with just leaving them with the decision if I can choose what path to take. And that's where my manager piece comes back in, because I temporarily try to join their team, so to speak, to kind of amplify their skill sets. But I also have had situations where people didn't need me to help them execute. They're just incredible at their job. They just needed support in landing that final agreement, that final decision as a group. And there I know to stay out of the rest of it, right? Because they don't need the additional support. They're super capable of implementing. They just needed decision-making frameworks. And that's where, for me, that switch is to realize that I'm in front of a group of people who just need some data, the ability to generate optionality, and a decision-making framework. Because, you know, today I was saying this to somebody earlier in a conversation, like, as managers, we always make imperfect decisions. It's actually what we get paid to do. in principle, right? Which is, you can't gather all the data that you want. You may not have time to generate the full optionality so that you can like have a full decision tree analysis, and you still have to make a decision. So my job is just to help managers improve their decision-making process. And that's where I'm fully in my facilitator role, which is just to guide them through that series of steps and then let them go at the end of it.
Thank you so much for this reminder. And my brain is firing in all different directions. I try to stay focused. Because first, I love how you approach your services and serving your clients, which sounds almost more like project facilitation, where yes, facilitation is nice to help them to come to ideas, but then leaving them doesn't make their life necessarily easier, or not for all of them. So how can you make it easier by also offering the project facilitation, which is different from project management? So you enable them. That's what I hear. And the second bit is yes, of course, there are imperfect decisions by definition, because we don't know the counterfactual and we'll never have perfect information. And then to enable a leader to come to a decision, accept that there will never be perfect information because there's a trade-off between speed or pace and accuracy. And at the end, we never know whether it was a right decision. So embracing this uncertainty and finding comfort in the imperfect decision, it's something that we have to embrace as facilitators all the time. So you're basically, and that's maybe then again the mix between the teacher role and the facilitator.
Yes, exactly. And I always find it, difficult to fully separate them from each other. But it's because I've been a manager myself, right? And I know that oftentimes I'm not, it's always the story like, do you want a hole in the wall or do you want the drill, right? And what you want is the hole in the wall. And so when you're hiring an external facilitator, you want an outcome for your organization. You don't want a facilitated session. Actually, it doesn't matter what the tool is. What you want is, I want to reach a decision, a conclusion. I want to upgrade my knowledge. I want to grow, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve as a team. I want us to get better at joint decision, whatever it is that you're doing. And the outcome is what matters. And so when I work with my clients, I try to stay focused on the outcome rather than what did I sell you, or did you think you needed a session and that was it. I always regret it actually when all I sell them is one session, because it doesn't give them the outcome that they need. They need more than that. Sometimes they need a side conversation afterwards. Sometimes they need to come back a couple of weeks later and see if they've changed their minds. Like, they need a process. They don't just need a session. And I remember that from my management days, like, okay, you walk into a session, you leave it enlightened, and then what, right? There's always the then what question. And I think the outcome is what I stay focused on. What did you want to achieve for your company? And did I actually help you to do that?
And how do you then help them or facilitate bridging the knowing doing gap? Because yes, they come out of the session and they know exactly what to do, and then life happens. Their calendar is cramped, they don't have time to breathe or to think, and they just rush from one meeting to the next, and at 9 p.m. they're just exhausted.
Yeah. So actually we do two things. Even when we just sell a facilitation session, although we do also sell kind of more long-term engagements, is we always end up sending an action plan following our session, which is, here's what you guys have to do now. And some things we have discussed in the session, and some things are just additive from us to say, like, okay, so what we've heard and where you've landed, this is the next steps for you. And that's where having been a manager is super helpful, because I know like the intricacy of execution in companies of all sizes. And I've luckily been able to work in really small organizations, but also in really big corporates. And so we're able to identify as a team, like, what are the actual next steps, including the politics, including the internal communications, including all of this other stuff that isn't just getting stuff done, but getting people on board, right? So we send them an action plan and then we follow up. I think people really need others to keep them accountable for what they need to do. And they love it when that happens. They're like, this is incredible. I had, given into the crisis of the day-to-day stuff. And I'm really grateful that you reminded me that this really important thing hasn't gotten enough of my time. And I think every manager wants that. They want like an employee or a chief of staff or a coach or whatever it is that says, you said this was really important, but you haven't spent any time on it. And I don't think that they react negatively. They always react with a lot of gratitude to say, oh my God, thank you for bringing that back.
I dare to challenge that. And I wonder whether it might be the crowd or the kind of managers that you attract with your services and your presence that you shout out into the world. Because I also know the other kind of managers who, driven by fear, by uncertainty, by ego, by you name it, then don't want to be reminded of their shortcomings, of what they might have forgotten, of their insecurities to have control over everything. And they might not be so. So I think that there's a huge trust component to come to the stage to really allow that help in. Because asking for help is a very adventurous moment, not to say vulnerable.
I understand what you're saying. And I think that that's true of all of us. We want to save face. We want to show that we're on top of everything. We want to exert control. But I think in the way that you phrase something or the way that you approach it or how you offer help, you can disable that reflex of saying like, who the hell do you think you are to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing? You can disable that. And you can show them that actually what you're committed to is their success, and that failure and iteration and setbacks are just a natural part of the process, but that you won't let them fall. Because the thing is, and I'm sure that there are managers who don't want that, but they'll probably not hire us either. Like these things tend to come hand in hand. But even with very resistant leaders that I've worked with, to your point, I think you establish a level of trust where they understand, actually, I don't need to do any of this, by the way. I sold you a facilitation. We're done. I sent you a recap because I'm really nice. And I could walk away, right? And I think there's something in that partnership to say, but I won't, because I care about your success more than I care about what I sold you. That eventually, I think every leader with a slightly open mind will really appreciate. I've never faced anyone who told me you're getting involved in something that doesn't concern you.
Beautiful. I think what I hear is this extra care, showing care and going the extra mile that pays off, because someone, and I think it's irresistible just for another human being, if you feel that someone genuinely cares, I think it's stronger than us. That's maybe some parental instincts or so that get triggered that we cannot resist if it's genuine. It's so thank you for the reminder.
Yeah, and I think, look, from a very tangible, why is this good for everybody point of view, we have clients, one client once called us the fairies, because even though at first everybody's resistant, they're like, why are you getting up in my business? What they see after hopefully 2 or 3 weeks of us working together, being pushy, reminding them, we even write emails that they're supposed to send to other people, right?
Love that.
We really go the extra mile. So it's not like, oh, Miriam, you're supposed to tell Marilyn this. We're like, Miriam, we decided together last time that you wanted to communicate this, and we thought you have a really busy schedule. So we wrote the email, feel free to edit it, but this is the gist of what you wanted to say, right? And it's just, eventually they just see okay, you know how hard it is to stop doing what you're doing and write an email? You think it's a 5-minute problem, but it's a 30-minute problem, or it's an hour-long problem. And they just see that oh my God, this person just made something work.
Especially because it's writing an email only becomes the 1 hour problem if you start overthinking. So if you're too much into the daily business and you care, oh, what will Judy think about that? And Thomas, he might misread this word. And then, there's Stephen. And so there's all this kind of inner dialogue that the person who has to write the email, has to send the email, might struggle with. If the fairies are writing the email, then it's easy to read it from this external perspective. Like, oh yeah, that's fine.
Exactly.
So you're taking the overthinking away and thereby liberating so much extra energy
and time. And once they start to see that, then they call us back in. You know, I have clients now who call me for things I don't actually sell, because what they know is that the problem will be solved one way or another. Not like, oh, she's going to come in and do a workshop for us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really, as a facilitator, understanding the outcome rather than the input. And as far as it is within my purview and my capability and my knowledge, helping push towards the outcome even beyond the scope of what I sold, has made it so that, like, you know, about 2/3 of our business is repeat clients that have been there from day one.
Which leads me then to another question. When is a project then finished? And at what point would you say that your business suddenly moved from being a consulting business to an interim management business?
A really great question. You know, when we do the consulting piece, actually, and this again is part of, because I was a manager, I designed it this way. We do consulting, which is, well, first we learn about your business. So we actually become almost equally or more knowledgeable than you about that specific problem. Obviously not everything, but the thing you hired us to address for you. Then we become consultants, meaning we take a step back, we analyze, we strategize, we give you a proposal about what we think the way forward is. Then we become project managers, which is we help you to execute it. And once the bulk of what needs to be executed is done, the worst thing that could happen is we walk away and then none of this sticks around. So how we end the project is training, scaling, propagating what we've done. So whether it's training other people, creating documentation, adding things to the onboarding experience of your new employees so that this becomes the norm of how we do things here, working on internal comms with you. So we'll go a step further to make sure that it becomes deeply ingrained. And in an ideal world, and we've managed to do that with a couple of clients, we come back 6 months later and we do a survey just for the new joiners about this thing that we changed, right? And we see if the people that we've never met, so they weren't there when we were supporting, now also operate in this new way. And that to me is the final closure, because now I can say this was sustainable change.
And what I hear is that you cracked change management without even calling it change management, right? And what I mean by that is change management is this huge word, this thing that brings so many companies to fail, where there's so many specialists out there and involves so many people and so many workshops. And then nothing happens and people burn out or frustrated and they leave. And when you explain it, it seems so smooth, easy.
You know, because what we knew from day one is, yes, and we definitely do a lot of change management in that process. You know the data, right? 70% of change management projects fail because of resistance from employees. And the second highest reason for why they fail is the middle management doesn't support it or role model it or know how to deal with the transition, right?
Blame the middle management.
I mean, by the way, you and I had this discussion.
Yes.
I am like the biggest supporter of middle management that you will ever meet. I am the last person to bash them, because I think middle management gets all the pressure from above and all the pressure from below, and rarely do they get the support that they deserve. But since those are the reasons for failure, like, the approach has always been for us that we hold people's hands through the process. So we go back to, like, primitive feelings. Why do people resist change? Because they're afraid. Why do they resist change? Because they're ashamed that they're not going to be able to sustain it. Why do they not adopt this new technology, process, whatever? Because no one explained to them why they should do it, and no one gave them context, and then no one really made sure that they learned how to do it. It's just like, here's a new process, please apply it tomorrow, you know? And we realize that like we cannot be successful in our interventions if all we do is convince top management that this is the right way forward. We need to help everybody else across the hierarchy adopt it. And if we don't, then yeah, we'll always be smart consultants. Like I think it's, with today's access to information, consulting is an easy job. Like there are so many smart people out there who can look at a bit of data and look at case studies and say, this is a good strategy. I think the hardest one is holding people's hand through this change, especially in a post-pandemic world where everybody's exhausted, has been through more than they ever thought they would have to, has changed everything in their lives. You can't just throw a deck at people and say like, this is how we're working as of tomorrow. So I think that human aspect, you mentioned care earlier, it's such a big part of how we approach it, that compassion to say, I'm going to hold your hand, we're going to do it together.
And as you said, to allow this fear in order that it doesn't transform into shame.
Yes.
I recently heard on a podcast that shame is silent. Shame always happens in silence, and it cannot survive if you communicate.
Exactly.
So communicating about these fears and about the not knowing and the change that is coming is magic. And still, I wonder now, to what extent would you include all these affected people in the process? Because I think there's a balance. And this might also be the difference between a full-fledged change management versus a consulting versus a one-off workshop.
So even for one-off workshops, interestingly, I always make it part of the process that before the workshop, I get to interview 3 or 4 people from across the hierarchy of what this workshop is trying to solve. When we do bigger consulting missions, I'll do 20 interviews. I'll do a survey for everybody. So I'll even be more comprehensive in involving the different layers that are impacted. But even for a small workshop, even by the way, if it's material that I've had for years, like I have a design thinking workshop that I've had for 7, 8, 9 years. Of course, it's evolved through time, but I could do it in my sleep, you know. I ask to talk to people. I look at case studies from inside the business that are relevant. And I try to understand how this would be implemented if after we work, even if it's just one workshop. It means maybe that, you know, our pricing is a bit higher than everybody else, but I don't think it's that much. I mean, adding 4 hours of preparation to a workshop is not crazy, but being able to speak to people and hear their story and understand the blockage, so that in the workshop, as I'm giving examples, as I'm focusing on one area versus another, I'm focusing on what's relevant for them.
And I think the clients you're talking to are not paying for the workshop or for the time, they're paying for the results and for the transformation.
Yes, I always try honestly to talk to the business side and not to HR, if I can be a bit like, of course, HR is not the same in every company, and some of them are amazing business partners, but sometimes all they want is to tick off a learning and development box. And if that's who I'm talking to, then I know we're not going to do a good job, because that's not what I'm good at. Some other person is going to be amazing at that, and they should hire them, right? What we're good at is the outcome. And so if you don't see that, if all you want is a 4-hour training on design thinking, then don't hire us.
Fascinating. Yes. It all boils down to the purpose. Right? Yeah,
exactly. And so that's why, like, talking to a team leader or a business unit leader, or an HR person that's like very, you know, this is a true business partner and not just focusing on organizing courses, right? then they see the value in what we do. Because otherwise, it's normal. I understand that's not what you're out to buy, and I'm trying to sell you something, and that's not what you were shopping for. But it always helps to have someone who understands, like, and after this is how we're going to implement it in our business.
And it makes total sense to me also just from the way how you operate after. So as I reflected before, it's based on trust. So you're writing emails for someone, you're telling them what to do. They must buy in and they must say, Marilyn, I trust you to do that. And otherwise it would be an HR business partner introducing you,
exactly,
which adds an extra step, an extra potential friction, because it is not a learning and development project that you're offering.
Yeah, exactly.
From your experience, what makes a workshop fail and what makes a project fail?
So many things can make a workshop fail, but I think for me, one of the main things, and again, it goes back to internal comms, is when people don't understand why they're here and what should happen after. Because then they don't know what position to adopt in that workshop, right? Like, you show up to a workshop, no one's explained to you why we chose this one. How's it going to change our business process or the way we do things or our team dynamics or whatever it is that we're working on? Then you don't have context, then you can't have good outcomes. And I find that to be the case a lot, that internal comms is just one of these things that so many companies are not good at. Even in the best companies, they're just not good at treating everybody like a mature adult and explaining context and just letting people know, here's what we're hoping to achieve. They kind of invite people to these workshops like it's going to be a magic trick. Like, you don't need to do anything before and you don't need to do anything after. Like, this 4 hours or 6 or 2 or whatever they are going to magically transform everybody.
Candy.
Yeah, and it doesn't work like that. You have to do the hard work. And so that to me is the biggest determinant of if the workshop outcomes will be realized or not, is, did you communicate?
Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you. And a question that I've never asked before, but I think it's so apparent. What's the cost of a failed workshop?
Time, setbacks, taking people back a step instead of one forward. Like, I would rather do no workshop than a failed one. Because not only did you not progress people into a new way of thinking, working, behaving, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you've also made them cynical about it. You'll be like, another one of these workshops where we come together and nothing happens. And so you increase their resistance to change further.
So how can you make it up? So what would be your advice of what comes after a failed workshop? Are you packing your bags and say, didn't work, I leave the territory to someone else? How can you recover?
A retrospective. And then action. I'll give you an example. We had a client recently where we sold the workshop in English. And then they said, but you all speak Arabic. Can you try doing this in Arabic with some of our staff, because they're not like native English speakers and they would participate more. Now, this staff happens to be in Saudi Arabia and I'm Lebanese and Tala is Syrian Palestinian. And the intricacies of this is that actually Lebanese Arabic does not sound the same at all as Saudi Arabic. At all. I mean, we understand each other, but this was a workshop about values where language really matters, right? And so they had they had really negative feedback about it, even though the same workshop in English worked really well. Oh. And even though it wasn't in our scope and we had done it just as a favor, we did a retrospective. We sent them a survey. We asked them to sign up for a second workshop where we would hire a Saudi facilitator to do it. And we brought them back in the room and said, we're so grateful you told us this was shit, because now we're trying to fix it. And then you can sell that to the client. Of course, it's not like you have to do all of this for free. You can be like, okay, well, we failed. Let's fix it together. Are you up for it? Here's the feedback we got, but here's the plan for how we can do it better. And then you do another one. we often think of like, even me, like I go into workshops thinking I'm going to transform people's lives, but it's a process, and it's okay to fail as long as you learn together and hopefully convince the client that it's worth it to invest in a second one.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hands-on advice, as we know it. And I would love, you told me when we met in Dubai, the story behind your company name.
Yeah, sure.
And I would love you to share this with the audience, because I think there's an entire next stream of conversation that may
come
out of that.
Yes, it's true. We haven't spoken about what we actually do yet. So I'll tell you a bit the story of how the company came to be and why it's called Cosmic Centaurs. But essentially, I studied architecture, spent the first 10 years of my career in the technology world, like in startups, building e-commerce companies, running an agency. And then when I went to do my executive MBA, I realized that most of my colleagues, who obviously came from large corporations, were really miserable at work. In fact, I think by the end of the year, 50% of them had quit their jobs. And I was very curious about that because I'd always been in really happy workplaces, tough, demanding, but happy. And so I said, okay, I need to learn what this looks like because I'm very curious. I mean, organizational strategy has always been in my blood for some reason. And so I said, okay, the next company I work with, it has to be older than 20 years old and bigger than 2,000 people. I want to understand what happens with time and scale. And so I ended up moving to Dubai, working for a company here called Emaar, which is the biggest real estate company in the world outside of China, and learned so much because I had different roles inside of it, including being the chief marketing officer of the properties and group, including being the head of the Dubai Opera. And I could see, what works and what doesn't work in these scaled environments. And then, the pandemic happened, the opera shut down and I was fired. And then after about 3 days on lockdown, I realized I was going to kill everybody in my household and I needed
3 days.
Literally 3 days. I actually have the timeline for this. It's really funny. And so I sat down and I tried to follow the advice that I used to give to entrepreneurs, which is that your product doesn't matter. Think about what problem you're trying to solve, because then what you sell to solve it will come. And I said, okay, what's the problem you want to be solving for the next, if you don't fail miserably for the next 15 years? And to me, the thing that's always driven me is human collaboration. I just love it when people figure out how to come together and create something that's bigger than just the sum of their parts. And then I sat there and I'm like, okay, collaboration's nice, but who's going to pay you for that right now? Like, everybody's having a mild panic attack about this new way of working. They're switching to remote. They've never done that before. Everybody's confused. Everybody's scared. And of course, the first barrier to collaboration at that time was remote work, because nobody knows how to do it very well. Very few companies do, at least. I had the luck to manage remote teams before, so I knew how you can fail miserably, and I knew some of the things that could make you succeed. And so I decided to start a company to support with that, knowing that as the pandemic progressed, we'd do other things but that also we were never going to go back to working the way we used to. So there will always be a new interesting problem for us to solve. And the name, now, long story to explain that, then came from, sitting thinking we're going to help people with remote work and hybrid work, and what do all of these people have in common? And the joke for me at the time was that we were all going to be wearing corporate shirts and pajama bottoms. So we would be half at work and half at home because of Zoom. And so in my mind, it brought up the image of a centaur, which is a half human, half horse mythological creature. And I thought, okay, we're all going to be centaurs. And then trying to find a name that fit with that. And at the time, everybody was using their virtual Zoom backgrounds because it was just the early days for a lot of people. And there was the default one in Zoom where your head was floating in outer space. And I'm like, everybody's a cosmic centaur. And now with the metaverse, that becomes even more interesting. But that's how I called it. And I always also say, if our clients don't have a sense of humor, then they probably shouldn't hire us, because we don't have like a serious name like McKinsey. You know?
I love it. And thank you for sharing that. I think it's so inspiring just to hear your story and how you came up to start a company by swallowing your own pill first.
I try to be, you know, someone with integrity and to do what I tell others that they should be doing. I'm very, very conscious about that.
And I would like to come back to something that you mentioned, that you've learned from experience what brings a remote team to fail or to succeed. So what are the key ingredients that would come to your mind, or the path where it can go wrong?
I think the first easy one to address is that working remotely is a shift in mindset. It's not just a shift in where we sit. And, you know, I think there's been a lot of discussions around that. Actually, one of the first things we did when we started the company was we wrote what is called the Remote Work Manifesto, which is inspired by the Agile Manifesto, which again in itself was a shift in mindset. It wasn't about like, this is exactly how you're supposed to do it, but it was more like, you need to think about this differently. And of course, the first things that you will now hear a lot about is asynchronous versus synchronous. So making sure that you're not trying to take your office behavior and then automatically put that online. You know, everybody, we've spoken so much over the last 2 years of Zoom fatigue and being in meetings all the time and never having time to focus. And the reason, actually, that's really strange because usually remote teams don't talk to each other all that much. They have a lot of focus time. And so it's just that people are like grabbing this by the wrong end of the problem. They're just trying to mimic their behaviors online. And that's just the sure way to fail. And I think working remotely, it's like every decision, there are trade-offs. But if you don't take advantage of the trade-off, which is you can have people anywhere, they could be working at any time in the day, they could be multicultural all over the globe, contributing through their diversity and perspectives. And if you just try to continue working as if we're all sitting in the same office in Dubai or wherever we are, then you're making the wrong decision. Bring everybody back to the office because you want to take advantage of what remote work has to offer. Think of it as a competitive advantage and try to just reposition your thinking there and say, what is it that I can do through remote work that I could never have done when we were co-located? And then try to make the best of it. If you try to force fit a square into a circle, it's just not going to work. Bring everybody back. You just can't manage it, right? But remote teams that are successful are highly disciplined. They're great writers because they actually it's not that they never meet, it's that they mostly don't meet like this. They don't do synchronous communication. So they've been trained to document really well. They've been trained to make all the information available to others as if they were never available themselves. So trying to make what can be made explicit. Of course, there's always tacit knowledge inside companies that's a bit harder to like just write down, but everything that can be made explicit is made explicit. I don't know if you've ever explored GitLab, for example's documentation. But yes. GitLab, of course, is one of the outliers of remote work. We can learn from them, but like, I think if you printed it, it would be like bigger than every dictionary you've ever seen in your life. It's like a massive piece of documentation, but there is no question that you would have that you can't just go to the repository and be like, how would you address this problem? And 90% of the time you will find an answer in writing. And it's just, if you don't create the right discipline and mindset, and you don't think of what can I do with this new setup that I could never have done when we were together, then you won't be able to leverage remote work and you won't be able to take advantage of it.
Thank you. I'm so happy that I asked the question. What I hear is that number one is the documentation system that matters most. So how can I find something? And it's almost approaching it from a UX perspective. So the image that came to my mind is the iPhone. You can put it in the hand of your grandmother and she will figure it out. Or you can put it in the hand of your toddler and they will figure it out. So how how can you design the work interface of a team, of an organization, in a way that you hire someone new, you put them there, and they will figure it out.
I love what you're saying, because I spent the first part of my career working on the customer facing stuff. So, I was a marketeer, I did design thinking, I was a product manager. And what you're saying is exactly the message that, I try to bring out with my clients, which is you have all these methods for how to design great experiences for your customers, and you apply them all the time. And yet you don't take these same methods and use them for your employees, right?
To look in the mirror for themselves.
Okay, do you have a sense of the personas of your employees? Do you understand their customer journey? Are you familiar with their level of proficiency in the technology you're putting in front of them? Are you mapping out their journey through the processes and the interactions that they have to take? And can you design a better world for them to work in? And so, people come to us and say, help me with remote work and help me with redesigning my office. And I'm like, first, we're going to redesign the work. And that's a user experience. And there is no reason that we don't know how to apply these same tools to a population that we know everything about, by the way. It's not even that we need like market data, or we have all of that. We just don't take the time. And so designing that user experience, and whether it's remote or co-located or hybrid, I don't have a judgment about what this is better than that. I think every company, every business, every culture will be better at leveraging one setup or the other. I just say, no matter what you're designing, can you be purposeful about the intention, the experience, the journey, the moments where that breaks and how you can fix it, right? And if you can do that, then you can design an incredible workplace. And the outcome of an incredible workplace is not just that people are happy or engaged, it's that engaged people are 50% more productive than those who aren't. And inspired employees who feel connected to your mission and your purpose and your values are 125% more productive, by the way, and can lead to 21% growth in your profitability. What company wouldn't want that?
And yes, absolutely. And I think even beyond engagement and happiness and feeling connected to the values, very hands-on, what I've observed is that why teams fail to work remotely is because they are taking away the opportunity to walk into someone's office to ask this quick question. Where do I find this information? Or do you remember what we discussed in the last meeting? Oh, I remember. So all this, the lack of processes, the lack of documentation, and we weren't aware of these lacks or leaks in basic organizational structure before we went online, because it was just so easy to walk into someone's office and to ask the question. But now every time we would walk into an office, we actually have to be explicit. We have to either grab the phone, oh, shame, guilt, I should know this. Who am I? I'm interrupting. We don't call anyway. Or I have to write an email. Even more shame. What if someone forwards my email and knows that I don't know? So by documenting, you're just saving so much time, because you don't have to figure it out. You don't have to ask. You don't have to sit there in shame and guilt of not knowing.
There's a number to that time. 9.5 hours per week is how much time people waste looking for information that's already available in their company. It's a whole day per week. It's like if you have a team of 5 people, it's like one of those team members is doing nothing.
And I think that might also explain why many office assistants are just burning out, because there are these 9.5 hours, maybe sometimes 8 hours per day, just being asked to find information that's actually already available.
Yeah. And like the thing is, it's like if you look at software design, when you're trying to sell a software as a service, like whatever, a Miro, a Zoom, or whatever, all of these experiences, they're what you call self-serve, right? Like you can go sign up, start using them, be onboarded. You never have to talk to a human. Do you know how hard it is to set up a self-serve experience? It's a lot easier to have customer service people and sales people that you could just call and be like, oh, this is how you're supposed to do it. But on the long run, it doesn't scale, right? And so it's the same thing here. It's like design the experience in a way where, at least for information that can be made explicit, it's there. And one of the things that we do with our clients, and when I say like we really don't mind getting dirty, is we rename.
Can I quote you on that? Sorry.
Yeah, totally. We rename their files. We literally organize sessions. We call them spring cleaning parties, where we bring everybody, we play music, we ask fun questions, like it's also a bit of a social event, but underlying that is we each take control of one folder, we open the files, we rename them so that people can find them. And it's not like a fancy consultant job, right? Like I don't see anyone at, any of the big consulting companies bothering with this. But if I can save them 9 hours a week, imagine how much value they can create for their company.
And I am intrigued. I would immediately hire you. Maybe I will immediately hire you. Because I think that's the one thing that we can go to business school, we can study business, nobody ever teaches us on how to start a documentation system and how to file, even our emails, right? Everyone speaks about email zeros, and then some start a folder system, and then they realize, okay, actually it's even worse. So let's put everything in one folder, red.
Yeah, exactly.
To do. So I totally see the value.
Yeah.
And wonder, we don't start from scratch, or usually. So I think it would be beautiful to start a company and to hire an expert like you and to say, okay, please let us set up a folder system from the beginning. So let's imagine the general situation where we're just confronted with this mess.
Yeah.
What would be your advice for getting started? What is the one thing that you can do that has the biggest impact right away, the quick win?
Okay, I'll say there's always a day zero. Even if day zero is not the day zero of the company, there's a day zero for when we change how we behave. And so while I'm sure you have a mass of documents that have been created in the past, you have probably many more to be created in the future. So suppose it's your day zero of this new discipline. And actually that's what we do. So we start by actually looking at the business side. We don't look at the departments, the teams, we don't care. We're like, we need to understand for the business to succeed, who needs access to what. Great. We start by structuring the folder tree, right? Like these are the folders that you need to have. And then within these folders, this is a relevant naming convention so that when you're searching, remember there's two types of people, those who search and those who file, and you need to accommodate for both of them. And then we say, great, every future document, at least start by creating it in the right place. And then once a quarter, take one of your old folders and clean it up and put everything where it should be, just once a quarter. And the compounding effect of that is that at the end of the year, you'll be done. Instead of doing nothing, and at the end of the year, you've created a year's worth of additional content and no one knows where to find it.
Thank you.
Day zero is today.
Day zero is today. Amen. Awesome. And to stay in the topic of processes and setting it up right and combining it with collaboration and remote collaboration.
Yeah.
If you were to set up the perfect remote team, where would you, so what is day zero of a remote team?
Team norms, I think. Before any of the tools, the technology, which software are we going to use, how are we going to file our content, what are our processes, you have to agree on how you want to behave with each other. You have to agree on what your red lines are as a team. So a simple team norms exercise, like things we tolerate, things we don't, things we believe in, what we think our goal as a team that makes us successful is going to be. That's for me the beginning of any team, remote or not. And then you do the rest. The rest is superficial as long as we know how we're going to behave. The biggest problems come not because we chose the wrong, project management. platform, but because we have the wrong attitude to each other and we don't say it, and it accumulates. That's why I love retrospectives. That's why I love, again, if you can make something explicit, make it explicit. How we behave with each other is something you can make explicit. Marilyn can say there are things I don't tolerate. Like, for example, I don't tolerate repeating myself more than 3 times. If you make me repeat myself for a 4th time, you're really going to have a bad day. And that may not be the case for other people, but you need to know this about me. And if I don't tell you this, then I'll just explode in your face one day and you're going to think I'm a lunatic, right? But this is the basics. Just tell each other how you want to behave and stick to those rules. The rest is hygiene. So the rest is set up a system, whatever that system is, be disciplined about implementing it, and then be disciplined about saying when it fails and fixing it. If you can just follow these simple rules, you can build a great team.
You sound so pragmatic. You are so pragmatic. It's so refreshing.
I am very pragmatic.
No buzzwords, no bullshit. It's just okay.
You see, I think that I always joke. My team's not allowed to use acronyms, and as often as we can, we try outside of our marketing, like in our actual work, we stay away from buzzwords, because acronyms or industry words, they're used to pretend that what we do has more value than it does. You talk to somebody from a consulting firm or from a finance background, or they're going to take a 2-word thing and turn it into an acronym. I'm like, do you need to do that? Because all this succeeds in doing is making me feel stupid. And for most people, they don't have the courage to say, I'm sorry, but I don't know what EBITDA means. Is it so hard to say earnings before, is it
Can
so
we just
hard?
pause for a second? I think it is, yes. It is so true. And how busy are we that we cannot pronounce the full word? And I was just thinking that yesterday I was hosting a session. I was talking about the USP, and someone had to ask in the chat, what does USP mean? So who am I to make this person feel bad? And I cannot expect everyone to know the unique selling point. And how much time would it cost me? Literally 0. So thank you for the reminder. And yes, yeah. I will sign the petition against acronyms.
I have to say,
0.
The guy who started this is Elon Musk a few years ago. He sent a memo to his team and he said there are a few acronyms that are officially validated by the company. Sometimes they're project names or things like that they want to keep confidential. You are forbidden from using any other acronym. And it's stupid, but maybe even you've never heard of the concept of unique selling proposition. But if you hear unique selling proposition, at least you will understand the meaning, like the English meaning, then you can read up about it. You can understand what frameworks or tools exist to develop it. That's fine. But at least you're not alienating someone from the first word. And it's not to say I'm not guilty of sometimes doing that, but I just try to put a trigger in my brain to say, when you pronounce an acronym, say, oh, by the way, I just said USP. This is what it means.
Thank you. And I will add it to my list of words that I'm not using.
I made it to the
list. Yes. And I haven't been aware of that. So thank you for pointing out this. It's a real blind spot. And I think words create worlds. And if we give someone, our peers, the impression that we are not talking with them, but to them, and expect them to know something, and we are willing to humiliate them.
Yeah.
I think that's not at least I can only speak for myself. That's not the message that I want to send.
No, for sure. And I mean, again, as a facilitator or a teacher or an animator, whatever you call yourself, you are there mostly to help simplify things for others, right? Simplify a decision, simplify a concept. That's great teachers are great learners because they're able to take something complex, understand it, and then simplify it. And so anything that you can do to do that will make you successful in your mission. Taking longer to explain something than you thought you needed, taking time to check, taking time to give people a chance to react, ask questions, give examples that they think mean this. but without, I always do this too in my class. When I ask a question, I say, it's not a trick question. You can't give me a stupid answer. Because that's another one, right? Like in so many teaching situations, like when teachers say, so what do you think? Is it this one or that one? They're trying to make you make a mistake so that, and it is definitely a pedagogical approach to make someone make a mistake so they can learn the correct answer. But if you only do this kind of question in a classroom, then you're alienating everyone there. And so to say, by the way, the definition is in the word, like I teach people about, like, I don't know, digital transformation. And I'm like, okay, let's talk about the words. Let's talk about artificial intelligence. What does it mean? Just without even knowing, just try to break down the concept. And this isn't a trick question, and you can get it from the word. Just gives people that security, the trust,
Yeah, that's it's a good point. It's something that I sometimes also observe in coaches, that they would ask, so what do you think? Where's this going? And I can sometimes feel or sense that it's not a question coming out of curiosity, but there is somehow somewhere hidden a secret answer. Like, well, I cannot look in your brain, so just spit it out. Ask me something that you're really curious about.
Yes, exactly.
And I think, in the teaching situation, it's then different, where you can ask questions also where you know the answer.
Yeah.
But I think they're, as you say, they're more effective if you spark someone's curiosity and you allow a little bit more space for an answer to emerge.
Yeah, because our education system is so much about people getting the right answer rather than asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, people are terrified. They're, as you say, it's like, even with a coach, you pay this person to help you, and they ask you this rhetorical question, and you're like, if you're a good student like you and I, you're like, oh my God, if I give them the wrong answer, they're going to think I'm stupid. That's what you're thinking, right?
Yeah.
Like, oh my, I have to say something brilliant right now because they already have the answer and they won't tell me what it is, and I better get it right. And this pressure to get the answer right is useless, because if you can just share your perspective and we can build on it together, I might disagree with you and we can move forward instead of this expectation of having the correct answer. And again, I think, like in facilitation or in project management or in a discussion with a colleague, it doesn't help to put up these linguistic or behavioral barriers. It only just creates those disabling feelings, guilt, shame, fear, whatever it is. And no one takes a good decision or gives a good answer from those places.
Yeah. And yeah, because trust doesn't emerge from these feelings.
Yeah. I mean, again, you look at the data around innovation. I was giving a talk about that yesterday, and you know what? There are a lot of things that influence innovation, but one of them is friendships at work and strong ties, which is having strong connection to your team. Other things do too, like weak ties and whatever. But would you have thought that, like, teams that are buddies are, more likely to come up with innovation? Maybe not. No one bothers with that.
And somehow, now that you say it, it makes so much sense, because if I'm buddy with my colleagues, then we would hang out after work, we would go to a bar, a cafe, continue having a drink, and referring. And I think that's one driver to innovation, is to refer to a topic from different perspectives. Mm-hmm. So if I'm talking to my colleagues in a buddy context, then I will start making jokes about a work-related topic from a different perspective. These are the insider jokes, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where creativity is born, where we connect different pieces of information in a novel way. And mm-hmm. this can only, or this works best, I think, if you...
And you're dropping the mask of trying to prove to me that you're a professional.
Oh, yes.
Right? Like, you don't know something, you'd be like, Marilyn, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about, right? Or, and I'm going to make an extra effort to simplify things for you because you're my friend. I'm not trying to impress you. I'm trying to help you. Mm. And so like all of these things, it's just, if we keep that mindset on, like this is how we should approach these professional conversations.
Should.
Right? Take that out, approach them as human conversations, see what happens.
Yeah. I'm just imagining what could be possible, can be possible with this approach.
Yeah, and I think, going back to what we're saying in the beginning, why don't my clients tell me to fuck off? Because I never put them in a situation where I am trying to sound smarter than they are. Right? Everything I say can be explained in simple terms. I don't overcomplicate it. And there's a trust between us that gets built over these interactions, that my only intention is to have a good outcome for you. If I can treat you like a human, I'm not trying to impress you. I'm not trying to upsell you stuff. You impress me, but also I know your flaws and it's okay. And like, we're here together. Don't worry, we're going to make it work. Then people don't react negatively.
The fairies.
Yeah, I really
Magic
love
fairies.
Yes, you never get antagonized by a fairy fixing your problem, do you?
In
Children's stories, even though fairies come and you've been struggling and then just wave a wand and everything gets fixed, you don't get upset at them.
And it's a human head with a kind of birdie
Exactly.
body. So there's something about the centaur.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I really think, like, I always say this, we spend so much time at work with one another, with consultants, with facilitators, with whatever. If it's not going to be an interaction that you feel fulfilled by and challenged, I'm not saying the things I say to my clients, sometimes I'm like, I'm sure they're going to fire me. It's not like I'm always agreeing with them.
You're not paid for that.
Exactly. But because I go at it from the point of view of, I want us to enjoy this interaction, even in disagreement, even in me telling you, I think what you're saying is bullshit, or the other way around, let's do it in a way that we feel good walking out of this meeting or walking out of this conversation. If we all approached our work lives a bit more like that, then I think a lot of the things we've seen, the fatigue, the burnout, the disconnection, the disengagement, would just disappear. I think it's about rebuilding that sense of community at work, which we used to have in our physical communities that we've lost because we moved to new cities and leave our families behind and spend all of our waking time in front of a computer. And I think the burden of recreating the community is on companies and leaders and teams.
Which leads me to a question that I would like to ask to finish, because I can, no pressure here. For you, what's the future of work?
I ask this question to my guests on Center Stage all the time. It's one of our final questions. And there's an answer that one of my professors gave that would have been mine. So I'm going to give it again. The future of work is work. And so I'm going to be, I remember when Joe Santos said that on one of our events, I was like, but I was going to say that. And the reason why is that I'm a child of I like exploring history and I like understanding time differently than the way we understand it. Like, human beings are actually really shitty at understanding time because we measure everything by our own experience. And in the grand scheme of things, we are nothing. It helps to remember that you are nothing because then you have a bit less pressure. But if you look at what we are experiencing today, it's not the first time we do that. It might be that it looks slightly different. This time it's about not being co-located, or it's about building resilience into our companies, or it's about whatever. Humans always think that they're solving a problem for the first time. It happens every few centuries that we are, but this one in particular, I don't think most of it that we're solving it for the first time, whether it's remote work, whether it's resilience in organizations, all of these themes that have come up from the pandemic. Actually, there's academic research that's 30 years old that's addressing these questions, or more, even from the 60s. And so when I say the future of work is work, I just say, like, remember, you are not solving this problem for the first time. There's a lot of really smart people or less smart people who've already experimented, talked about it, documented it. Go back and look at what they said and see what still applies and what doesn't. Of course, things have changed, context different, industries, whatever. The internet is different than what it was 30 years ago. But we are still, it's still about the same fundamentals, right? Like, what is the ultimate goal of an organization? To generate value. For who? For everybody. For its employees, its shareholders, its customers, ideally its society. Great. If we start there, then we look at how are we achieving value for everybody? We write down our purpose, our vision, our strategy. Great. Next step. How do we bring people together in the best way possible so that they can achieve this value that we have imagined? The fundamentals of designing work, which is what capabilities do you need? How do you group people? Which processes do you provide them so they can do their best work? How do you learn from failure? All of these things, none of that is new. So if you just remember, it's very reassuring to remember that you can go back to the fundamentals. And the future of work is what we design it to be. But that was true 5 years ago, and it will be true in 10. Every company has the choice, and every team even has the choice to design work in a way that helps them to fulfill the value that they promised they would create in the world. Every day is day zero. Fundamentals don't change.
It's a mic dropping moment.
I don't have a mic to drop, but
I have two.
I just,
Thank you.
yeah, I mean, that's my vision of the future of work. Just focus on doing what's right.
Thank you so much, Marilyn, for sharing your time, your insights, your wisdom, your magic, your smile. So listeners out there, jump to YouTube to watch the video.
Yeah, thank you for having me and for this, like, you know, I really like thoughtful and slow conversations, and this has been, it's almost been like therapy, you know?
Thank
So
you.
thank you for creating that space.
Yes, and I have no doubt that the audience will sit there. So how can I work with Marilyn? How can I get in touch?
Well, I mean, you can go on our website. That's cosmiccentaurs.com. I'll spell it out just in case. Cosmic, COSMIC, and then Centaurs, CENTAURS.com. You can also try and find me on LinkedIn. I always answer every message that I get. So don't be shy, just reach out and say hi. And if there's a resource I can share and we have it on our website, I'm happy to just send you a link. And if you want to have, you know, a more advanced conversation, then, you know, we'll find time for that. And yeah, that's the best way to reach us.
Wonderful. Thank you. See you soon. Hopefully back in Dubai or somewhere else in the world.
Yes, I can't wait to welcome you here again. Hopefully very soon.
Dim, da, da, dim. At the end of the podcast jingle.